Hi, my name is Derek. I'm an audience researcher with Facebook. How I started in research is by chance. I'm trained as a quantitative kind of like analyst, and in my early years in Facebook, I was doing a lot of user segmentation work on identifying affluent people, people who travel very frequently. So I was using a lot of big data to actually produce user segments. As you know, I spent so much time on quantitative side. Another team actually told me like, hey, do you want to join our team because you can use your quant skills and then you can actually pick up like core skills along the way, and we have like a network of qualitative researchers that you can learn from. So I actually joined that team, and I see myself more of a part analyst, part researcher kind of like person, and I traverse between these two roles in my projects. Yeah.
Hi, Belinda from International Flavor and Fragrances. I have a lot of competitors out there today. My background, I dropped in research by accident as well. I have economics background, so I started off with merger and acquisition. That's how I first started. But I also have a background in consumer research and psychology, and I was introduced to the flavor industry, and I never left from there. So that's my background. Oh, yes, I'm a sensory consumer researcher for International Flavor and Fragrances.
So, the name of this discussion and the topic that we've brought these two panelists on to talk about today is marrying qual and quant. And I will leave it open to you too that we don't have to only talk about qual and quant, but marrying methodologies just in general and how that works. So, just to kind of start that out for you, how do you define marrying two methodologies? What does that mean to you in your work?
Um, I actually share with Nikki. I think one of the things we should not typecast ourselves into whether what is qual and what is quant, and therefore you should use it as if it's a totality. So we do in IFF, well, we do traditional qualitative. So we do look at ethnography. We do focus groups. But more importantly, what we are seeing is in terms of the qualitative part of it. Con- our customers do look for quantitative data, so you do need to marry in the quantitative at some point to show that the quantitative and the qualitative can be mirrored together. But what I try to do now is to advocate the power of qualitative, because what happens in the quantitative research itself, you get the data, great, you have great scores or low scores, but you're not exactly sure what is actually happening, and therefore you need the qualitative part of it to give more voice to the consumers, and I think that's when you need to marry the two of them together.
I think one observation that I have looking at all the presentations and would be, if you look at like us, right, as a technology digital native company, we have a wealth of data on user behavior on our platform, and and brand advertisers and businesses come to us and say like, hey, you guys are sitting on a wealth of data, like can you share with us? But increasingly we are also like moving into the offline space to understand how are people behaving outside of Facebook, right? And because we want to address the knowledge gap so that we can be on par with a lot of the brand advertisers that are advertising on our platform. We know that we can never compete with on the consumer insights front with the with CPG brands that have 20, 30 years of experience doing consumer research, but we try to move into that space to sort of address the knowledge gap and put ourselves and inform our internal stakeholders to be to be aware of like what is happening, what are the conversations, what are the whispers happening in companies that advertise with us.
So maybe we could start out with you guys sharing some examples of when you have successfully married qualitative with another methodology, something that worked really well, either for a specific business objective or to help lead from a whisper to an actual insight that you were able to act on.
One example would be on the Instagram front. A few years ago, when Facebook acquired Instagram, it it was a totally new platform, and the demographics tend to be different as well, right? So, and we actually had plans to start thinking about putting advertising on Instagram, and we were not sure like how people will perceive or react to ads on Instagram, because traditionally, I mean, there were no advertising on it. So we started way ahead of like the product team. We started thinking about like talking to people, you know, how they feel, how they use Instagram, and increasingly in certain markets like in Southeast Asia, we using while we were talking to people, doing street intercept, we realized that there's a potential in commerce on Instagram, because people are using hashtag, and if you look at Indonesia and Thailand, some of the top hashtags that are being used are actually not related to their daily life. It's actually clothes for sale, or food products, and people are actually using hashtags to actually assess and learn about some of the products that they're interested. So I mean, while doing Qual, we started looking into like the data that we have, and we could see like in certain parts of the world, the trend is very prevalent, and we then actually go back to the product team and let them know like, hey, you know, this is the trend happening in certain parts of the world where, you know, Instagram, apart from a visual platform, people are actually using it as a commerce platform. How can we start thinking about like, you know, enabling this so that businesses can be successful on this platform as well?
I actually have a couple of examples. So one of the things that we have done was we did make use of qualitative to understand about emotions of consumers. And then from there, we translate back to quantitative data. But what happens is once it gets to the quantitative part of it, you get either a statement or a singular word. And we actually have to marry back to the qualitative data to say as to what it means. So for example, when a consumer take a word happy, it's quantitative, but there is no context to it. So we actually need to go back and dig our qualitative data to say, what does this word actually happy means? What is the context of it? What is the color of it? What is the feel of it? And that gives more meanings to the quantitative data. So that's how we marry both the qualitative and quantitative. And then in terms of another example I have was a lot of us do home use tests. And some of the home use tests are quantitative data. And what we decided to do was we decided to add in things like semiotics into the equation. We asked permission to take pictures and to see how they live, how they cook, what do they actually use, and we add that to it. So if let's say we are studying, somebody mentioned about, you know, coffee, instant coffee. We go into the house and then we realize that, well, they have instant coffee. They also have coffee and creamer and they add on to it. What's happening, you know? Why can't they just drink the instant coffee as it is? Why do they need to add coffee and creamer? And that adds depth to your quantitative data that is being collected.
So before I go down to my next question on the list, any comments from anybody? Any shared experiences, different experiences, anything that you want to add or question so far? Don't be scared. All right, next one. For those of you that were here yesterday morning for Rena's presentation, I know, Derek, you missed it a little bit, but there was a lot of debate. She raised a lot of points about whether or not qualitative is actually missing the mark. Is it doing its job? Are there some gaps in whether or not qualitative has evolved? And that led to some really great conversation here. In your work, when you are talking about obviously marrying qual and quant or qual and other methodologies, do you find that there are some weaknesses in the qualitative side, or are there some gaps that are still left open qualitatively?
One of the issues that I faced is when we do qualitative research the clients will ask, so what happens is there's a lot of product testings also in the qualitative research, and the clients will ask us to put in a 9-point scale, 5-point scale, 7-point scale, doesn't matter, but they ask for it. And after that, we will go around the table and saying that, can I have a score? But basically what happens is people are totally missing the mark of it. They are very interested in N size of 6 or 8, what is the liking scores? And they totally forget the purpose of trying to understand consumers and trying to, know what's behind the thoughts of that, but they will just focus on the score. So I think as qualitative researchers, we need to learn how to manage this with internal stakeholders and external stakeholders, that this is really a qualitative data point of collections and trying to understand about consumers and not about what is the liking scores.
I think some of the gaps in qual would be like quality and integrity. Like as our platform grows to like more than 2 billion users, it becomes very complex to do qual, right? Because like n size of sample size of 12 or 20, is it representative of country? And the truth is, we know that it will not be representative because of like, when we work with partners and even when we recruit people, we might not recruit like a fair representative of like how the representative of the market. So I think there's a lot of stake at hand because if you look at like the platform, and even if you look at other industries like pharmaceutical or even food, right? Like where there's a lot of people actually are using the product. I think other industries also have the same problem about representation, like whether how can they improve this?
So I'm going back to you, audience. Anybody else have anything similar to share or anything that you want to challenge? What are the things that you have experienced that might be a gap qualitatively when you are combining methodologies and doing multiple approaches? Anyone? Yes.
I think one of the things that big data has done, which is different from the past, is previously all data was like aggregated. Quant was aggregated data. And I think the new thing big data has done is it gives us individual level data, and it gives us like store level data. So some of the beauty of qual used to be that it's about individuals. It's about individuals, not about groups. But now big data can give you a lot of information about individuals. So I think that's the shift that qualitative research is not sufficiently embraced, and has not understood that it's no longer necessary. It's no longer about just observations. I get better observations via video and social listening. I don't need this. I think, and also it's not enough to just get to the why. For me, why is necessary, but why is not sufficient. So I think the step change needed is how to get to more insights, which is beyond the why. Like, what do I do with the why? And get to more insights. And I feel that's kind of the gap that I see today, and that's the bench strength of qualitative researchers in like raising the bar in this area is not happening as fast. While on the other side, big data is doing a lot of leaps and bounds, and he is talking about, like I was inspired when Derek said, like, I have like lots of data points, and now I'm trying to figure out how to get more consumer insights. So big data has figured out their opportunity and is moving here. But I feel like this space has not pinned its opportunity and is like a slowly boiling frog, and has not sufficiently like upped the game. That's kind of my take on this. It's provocative and might make us uncomfortable, but I think that's what we're here to discuss.
Absolutely. So how do either of you feel about this? Any points of agreement, disagreement, anything you want to add?
I totally agree with you. I mean, insights that does not have a purpose, it's not insights. And I think I like the idea, the earlier group was sharing about Pizza Hut, whereby there's a lot of collaborations going on. We need to know the client's perspective, what challenges they're facing. There may be insights that is created and little gold nuggets that has been found, but because we do not understand what the clients are actually having problem with, we couldn't share more of that can translate into, like what you say, perspective. So I think collaboration should be that way. what I'm feeling as flavor fragrance company is we are all working in isolations. There is a lot of nuggets, but we are not collecting it together. Yeah.
So on the big data space, if you look at, I mean, the growth of like big data and machine learning, right? Like, which means that increasingly we are able to use unstructured data, put some meaning to it, and become structured, right? So in the space of like social listening, it would be one example where it's mostly unstructured data. We put some algorithm and text mining methods to actually mine topics out of unstructured data. So in big data, like there's a lot of tools and like you mentioned, like innovation in terms of like improving that space. But if you look at qualitative, right, like it's the data that we have are mostly unstructured because it's through talking to people and also like using neural. But then again, I think I agree with you in a way where I don't think we have a solutions to automate or sort of like what we have in the big data space to actually use machine learning to structure unstructured data in qualitative. And I think that's a big gap that we have. And I think some of the conversations that we have earlier on like AI and on chatbots would I mean, I know that this is not the focus of this conference, but I think I foresee that like in the next few years, this will be a big topic interest as we start thinking about tools that can automate the structuring of unstructured data in qualitative research.
Yeah, so I really like both of these points, one about collaboration, but also about the tools. And we've already heard also from you already that it's not just the tools that we use, but also we kind of need the human behind the tool to bring perspective to the table and insight. So I'm wondering, combining all of these things, this human element, this idea of collaboration, but also this idea of adding structure to the data, what do you think should be the role of your suppliers? So I've heard from you, well, I know I need to be more involved in my clients' objectives, but what about the people that are supplying you with the research? What do you want them to be doing differently, or what should they be doing better to help you get past the why and get to something that's actually insight for you? Tough question. And if other people have answers to this or feedback to this in the room, you are more than welcome to pitch in. Just shoot up a hand.
The answer is simple for me. Like we are always looking out to scale our research. We globally, our consumer research team is about less than 20 people, and if you look at like the number of users we have on our platform is really huge, right? And how can 20 people, do so many research across all the markets and into like subsidies as well? So we are constantly looking out for like ways to scale our research, but also bearing in mind that we care about quality as well. So if there's a technology provider or solutions that check the box for these two things that we care about, then it makes sense for us to actually spend more time and investment into that space.
So what I would love, in terms of working with my suppliers, is a lot of my research is ad hoc. So I meet suppliers here and there. But I think what is actually might be missing is having a relationship with the supplier that I have, whereby we don't look at ad hoc research, because a lot of ad hoc research probably repeat themselves many, many times. And to go back to some part of earlier qualitative research, whereby you look at longitude studies. So you try to basically follow the journey of consumers. I think that would be a great partnership.
Anybody else have anything they want to add on what you need from collaboration and from partnership that maybe our panelists can comment on? No? I did want to kind of move on as well. We've talked about what are the gaps in qualitative, and we've seen a lot of really inspiring stories over the last day and a half about, showing case studies where qualitative has actually made a really big impact on businesses and business objectives. So I would love to hear from the two of you, what do you think are the strengths of qualitative? So when talking about marrying qual with another methodology, what does qual bring to the table that you feel is very invaluable about this type of research?
I think I agree with there was an earlier presenter who says that a lot of our top managements are sitting away from the consumers. They're really, really quite far away. And one of the things interesting about qual research, you can actually share with them what these consumers are actually saying. So it's not your researcher telling you, it's seriously your consumers telling you. So please hear them. And I think it helps us bridge the gap with our management. And I think using that methods, combining quantitative as well, we cannot put that aside, that gives us a presence to making executive decision. So in IFF, basically what happens, we were very lucky in the sense that we have constantly been invited to our executive meetings. Yeah.
I think we talked about this yesterday, like where both our companies are US based, so which means that and a lot of people that work on certain in US probably have not seen the rest of the world in especially in emerging markets, right? So I also have the same problem where in terms of how can we humanize insights, right, for folks that are sitting in engineers or product managers that are 25 years old, fresh out of college, and managing a product. We are starting to think about how can we excite them through some of the medias like videos or using eye tracking to give a sense of what is the typical day that people go through while they are consuming media or using our products. I think essentially the role of qualitative will sort of remain because it helps to humanize insights, and which what big data is not able to do.
So that raises a really interesting point. Are there some of you in the room that are working on the brand side or on the client side that are working for a brand or a client that is actually Asian based? So it is actually rooted, headquartered in Southeast Asia, because obviously these two are working for American headquartered companies. So I would love to hear the perspective from someone on the other side. Is there somebody in the room, anyone that is working for an Asian brand? No one in the room is working for any brands that have started here. Well, that's a finding. So is there anyone that wants to offer a different perspective? I can't imagine that you're all working for American brands or American companies. Well, if you are, that's quite scary, and I probably shouldn't be moderating this panel. Anyone want to offer a different perspective? I know it's before lunch. Come on now. Somebody's got something to say. Bao, can I please count on you to say something about this? I'm putting you on the spot, I'm sorry, but you've been so articulate these last 2 days.
Okay. The thing is, I'm working for a US-based company also. But in the past, I worked for, a Vietnamese local company leading in FMCG company, leading in the FMCG industry. And in that company, you know what? Surprisingly, the CEO only looked at qualitative data. Okay. For the reason we may suspect, because for him the tick the box of the quantitative is he didn't see the insight behind. He didn't see the emotion behind. But when we look at the market and in Asia, what you realize that you have APAC region. APAC region, basically there are two APACs. You have the APAC including Japan, Australia, and to some extent Korea, which is the market in FMCG industry, at least I'm talking about, much driven by the city, the urban, big cities. But if you look at the other markets, even China, Thailand, so on and so forth, a lot of consumers are staying in the rural areas. So in rural areas, sometimes digital tools doesn't cover all. Okay, mobile penetration is lower, so on and so forth. Facebook or whatever, Twitter, whatever you've been talking about here since yesterday, doesn't cover everything. And in terms of lifestyle, in terms of culture, it's much still behind. So there you have a place, a big place for traditional qualitative research. And that's how, to some extent, in some cultural contexts and countries, that you do see qualitative research still plays a big role in Asia. Yeah, that's my input.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
I wanted to share two things. I don't think I work only on global brands because some of our brands have a very regional flavor and some of them started from here, like SK2. I think there are two things that I probably wish this group would take away. I think one is, let's stop apologizing that qualitative research is not rep. I'm saying celebrate it. I don't want to talk. I have rarely found insights from an average rep consumer. And I would actually love to, I get that from a quantitative data, what they don't like. I almost want to say celebrate that qualitative research is about going and talking to people on the extremes, really figuring out what's coming next, or figuring out more deeply. So I think that's the richness that qualitative data brings, and we should celebrate that. And I rarely get that in quantitative studies. The second, I think, is a bit going back to what he was talking about. I think you were talking rural China, etc. But one of the things that we're observing as trends is while people are becoming globally well connected, there is also a question of identity that is coming up, because if everything becomes the same, then there's a counter trend. Then how am I different? How am I special? And I think I am increasingly looking for more local contexts, cultural contexts, a better understanding, and keeping on the pulse of that, I think is going to be super exciting, especially for brands in this region. Because if everything were perfect and all the data was telling us the truth, then all our brands should be growing, and they're not. And all our brands should be growing in Asia, global brands should be growing in Asia, and they're not. And I think these are a couple of the things that we are missing, bringing to the party, and I see this as a unique space that qualitatives can own.
That's great, and I'll actually ask a point about both of those questions if we have time, but just branching off of the point that you've just made actually led me to a question I wanted to ask you anyway. We are seeing, even if, for example, in China especially, but in lots of countries, there are rural pockets where mobile penetration is lower, maybe tech adoption in general is not as high. That being said, people are just in general becoming more connected, whatever that may mean in their local market. And therefore, identities are shifting. And it is important to have this local cultural context. At the same time, there is sort of a global identity also being formed. So thinking about the way that consumers are changing moving forward. And I'm really interested because you obviously work for a technology social network company, and you work for something much more to do with everyday, the foods we eat and the beverages we drink and things like that. So I'm interested to hear from both of you. Thinking about how consumer behavior is changing, whether you think it's rapidly changing or whether you think there are some areas where it's really still very traditional. How do you foresee your connection to those consumers happening as identities are shifting in the future thanks to technology or thanks to mobile this or that? Anything that you want to add on that?
So well, back to the rural area, but somebody mentioned this, so I'll go on with that. There is connectivity is definitely there. Like someone mentioned about Indonesia, they have one of the highest connectivity, so they do not shy away from social medias, all right? But to get them to come in to talk to us only using social medias, it's something that what we understand is the Indonesian consumers are still not very comfortable. They would not mind posting, but if you really want to go in depth, it's still better to go traditional way. But in terms of the rural area, whereby you don't have so much access, maybe like in China and also in some other countries, like even in India, what we are seeing is people do have access to technologies. Not social media per se necessarily, but they have access to technology. Traditional television is definitely one of them. And what we are finding is through conversations with them is they do have aspirations. And you could see they know what's going out in the world. They know, they have aspirations. Maybe in terms of economics, they're not quite there yet to achieve. But this is the future consumers. They will hopefully eventually be one of those consumers that will be able to have a higher purchasing power. So I think you need to understand, even for those that may not have the current economic strength to buy, that they could be our future consumers?
Increasingly, I think as a company, we are thinking about connecting the next billion users, and that entails, building infrastructures and improving connectivity for the rest of the world that has no connections, right? So, to the internet, and I think we have a few initiatives like Internet.org, and we also develop like in-house sort of like a drone to beam internet to emerging markets. It's still in the nascent stage, but I think we have sort of like done some trial in a few countries, and we are able to do so. I think internally we care about like people connecting to the internet for the first time, and we have an internal like team called the Empathy Lab, where it's basically a section of the office where we have devices that are being used by people in emerging markets. So it could be BlackBerry in Indonesia, it could be a Nokia phone in India, or a Reliance connected phone. And what we do with the Empathy Lab is like anybody can actually grab a copy of a device, and it is deliberately slowed down to the speed that people are experiencing in those markets. So as our products team are developing products for emerging markets, we are so used to using iPhone and Android devices where they are so fast, right? And at the click of a button, you should show like what happened next, or even video, right? But the whole idea is to like sort of like mimic the conditions that people are facing in this market, so that as product teams develop products, we are starting to think about like how should we compress videos, or and improve the experience for people who are using this.
That's great, and actually this links back with the point that you were making about not being representative. Inherently, it is impossible to empathize with every human being on the world. That's not empathy, actually. That's just trying to understand. So the actual act of emotionally understanding where another person is coming from and their experiences has to be limited to pockets of people that you connect with. So I'm just interested in your thoughts on that. Obviously, the more you empathize with people, the less representative the sample inherently becomes, because you cannot empathize with mass amounts of people. So what role does, we've just heard from you, but I would love to hear from you as well, Belinda. What role does empathy play for you in the work that you're doing around developing, very highly sensory related products and flavors and scents?
I get a difficult question. How should I say? We do a lot of emotion studies that allows us to hopefully understand a little bit more about people, about their values. And I would not say it's definitely we empathize. I think empathy, this word, is going to be very difficult to say in that way. But what we do try to do is still understand, to be honest with you. You do need to understand before you empathize, and that is very important. So when we look at what people are going for in terms of their concern, their values, and their fears, and then from there, what we're trying to understand is, does this particular scent or particular flavor that can help them, I will not say eliminate their fears, eliminate their worries, but at least, give them a certain amount of comfort. Yeah.
That's great. So we just have a couple of minutes left, and I would really love to hear from someone. I see that there is a question. I just want to say, before your question, I'm not going to skip over you, but just in case for the next question to come up, I would also really like to hear from someone on the agency side at some point. We've heard from lots of people on the brand side. I don't know if you in the back are agency side. Yes, great. If there's more of you, I would love to hear your feedback and thoughts about any of this. For the moment, I pass it over to you.
Hi, my question is really, there's been a lot of observations about the fact that big data, what we hear on social media, etc., can possibly replace qualitative. And perhaps, therefore, my question is to Derek. Given the fact that people do not really portray what they truly are there's a high level of posturing, which everyone does on social media. The variations could vary across market, but it exists. I mean, how reflective do you think that it would be to use social data instead of, or do you think the role would be complementary?
I would say it's not reflective of actual behavior. I would say it's not reflective of the actual behavior. And I think you accurately capture some of the consumer shift, right? And if you look at few years ago where, Twitter and Facebook and all the social media platform, like how people are actually using the platform is slightly different, right? Where text seems to be the dominant kind of content that people produce. But if you look at the features that and the features that we put into the on our platform and the consumer shift, right? Like now people are consuming and producing more visual content, like the likes of like photos and videos. So which means that first we need to understand there's a consumer shift. Then again, then also we need to think about like as people are aware of like privacy issues, we do see that there's a trend of people moving into like instead of like sharing it in the open space, there are other avenues where people can share their thoughts and feelings, right? So if you look at a forum, for example, or blog where people post, I think now that we do see a lot of consumers moving into like communities that it exists not only on like these platforms, but it could be on instant messages like WhatsApp or Messenger, where for example, like I'm part of a mommy's group because I'm a new parent, and it's interesting to be in part of the group, right? Because I could hear all the I could observe all the questions that are being raised by mummies and so on and so forth. So I think, and in that space, right, people feel less judged in a way because all I know is the phone number and I don't know the identity of the person. And we do see that happening in some parts of the world where people are moving into private space to share their thoughts and feelings, which also means that like how representative is social listening tools, because social listening tools are able to actually capture the public space but not on the private space where most of the conversation and intimate conversations actually happens. I hope it answers your question.
Yes, it does. This is actually just an observation too. So yeah, thank you so much.
I would love to take one more. Yes, hand just here.
Thanks, Derek. Thanks for the great discussion. So I just want to say, well, we do talk about empathy and emotion as almost like a limitation or an option, but as we go along now, I mean, emotion and empathy is at a human level is essential, is core part of everything that we do. So when you say empathy, may not be able to empathize at a massive scale, or I mean, we have to. I mean, when you're moving to customization, when people are talking about yes, AI to even customize at an individual level, then it is also means emotion at an individual level. So I also have an hypothesis that as things go, big data, complicated data analytics, now we are moving into AI, artificial intelligence, where machines are going to do everything for you. I think the need for emotion and that human connect is going to get more, or the demand for that is only going to get more because you have machines to do the other parts. Now what's remaining is going to be the emotion and the human part. So that it's only going to get bigger and not about whether replacement or threatened or limitation. So I've been working with technologies, and we've presented a few things on what we've done on Neuro, VR, but I agree with a lot of being said on everything is just to form in a bedrock or a foundation to bring in our human perspective and take it to the next level in terms of imagination, rather than using a shiny toy itself becoming the end goal. Yes, there is risk of saying, people today, oh, that's interesting, let's put a tick mark. KPI, use new tools this year, put a tick mark against it. So hopefully not become that, but only become ways of enabling better imagination, better human connection, and better empathy, ability to empathize. Thank you.
Great. That is all we have time for actually before lunch. I will not continue to stand between you and food. So please thank my two panelists and thank everyone in the audience that participated.